I still don't know how to process this. When they told me the results, my whole world just stopped.
No. No, God, no.
The morning started like any other. Gray light spilling through the blinds of my small cabin in Aspen. But the buzz of my phone shattered the quiet.
No, God, no.
I wasn't expecting calls, especially not one that would ruin my world before breakfast. The caller ID was unknown, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Mr. Parker?" The voice was soft, professional. "This is Dr. Melina Hart from Aspen General Hospital. We need to talk about your son, Liam." My stomach dropped. Son? I hadn't heard that word in a while. Hadn't felt the weight of it in years. "What happened?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Liam's been diagnosed with leukemia. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and the tests indicate you might be a match." I froze. The word match echoed in my head, but it didn't matter. I was already moving, already packing, already thinking about the last time I'd held him. 11 years. 11 years of birthdays, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and soccer games. And now, in the midst of a nightmare I couldn't ignore, I was racing against time to save him. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Snow-slick roads, early morning traffic, me gripping the wheel like it was a lifeline. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The thought of Liam, sick and fragile, waiting for me, kept me moving faster than my own fear. I parked outside the hospital and grabbed the envelope from my jacket pocket. It wasn't from the hospital. Not exactly. It had been slipped under my door a few hours before I left. My hands trembled as I read the words written in neat, careful handwriting. "Dad, I'm not your son." My heart stopped. The paper felt heavier than any weight I'd ever carried. I had been ready to save him, to give every last ounce of myself, and this was his answer? My Liam, the boy who had trusted me with scraped knees and secrets, had just told me I didn't matter. I swallowed hard. For a moment, I thought about walking away. But then I remembered the nights I had spent teaching him to ride his bike, the countless times I had stayed up when he had a fever, the years I had silently endured the bitterness of divorce and distance. This wasn't about biology. It never had been. Still, the sting of betrayal cut deep. I had expected a fight, resistance, maybe even anger, but nothing prepared me for this quiet, crushing rejection. Liam's envelope wasn't just words. It was a wall. And now, standing in the sterile hospital hallway, I had to decide whether I would respect that wall or break through it. I shook my head and tucked the envelope into my jacket. I'd learned long ago that life wasn't just about being recognized for your efforts. It was about showing up even when the recognition never came. Some people might call it a revenge story, the kind where you prove your worth against all odds. But this wasn't about proving anything. This was about him, my son, or at least the boy I had loved as one. With that, I pushed open the doors to the hospital, my chest tight, but my resolve firmer than ever. I was here to save him, even if he refused to see me as his father. And somehow, I knew that the hardest part wasn't the leukemia, or the tests, or the waiting. It was convincing him that love could survive rejection. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet panic. Every step I took echoed down the long hallway, my boots squeaking slightly against the polished linoleum. I clutched the envelope in one hand, the words, "Dad, I'm not your son," still burning into my brain. Liam was inside, probably asleep from chemo, and yet I felt the weight of rejection heavier than any medical crisis. I paused outside his room, taking a deep breath. 11 years, and a single sheet of paper could undo all of it, or at least make me feel like it had. I pushed the door open. Liam's small figure was curled under a hospital blanket, his hair thin from treatment, his face pale, but still unmistakably him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, sitting on the chair by his bed. "How are you feeling?"
I still don't know how to process this. When they told me the results, my whole world just stopped.
He didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling, arms crossed, jaw tight. The envelope sat on the nightstand, unopened by him. My heart sank further. 11 years of love, care, and sacrifices, and here I was, ignored. I remembered something my friend once told me about storytelling for YouTube. How people want to see the emotional journey before the resolution. So I leaned back in the chair and spoke quietly, as if Liam could hear my thoughts. "You know, sometimes people call this a revenge story," I said. "But it's not about revenge. It's about showing up, even when no one notices." That got a small reaction. Liam shifted, barely, but enough to let me know he was listening. The nurse knocked gently and came in with a clipboard. "Ethan, the lab wants to run the preliminary compatibility test. We should do it today if possible." I nodded and stood. As we walked toward the lab, Liam trailed behind, silent. The corridor was almost empty, except for a kid in a wheelchair who accidentally rolled into Liam's foot. Liam yelped and stepped back, his face turning red. The other kid froze mid-smile, realizing what happened. I couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh. Liam shot me a look, half embarrassed, half incredulous, but I swear I saw a tiny flicker of amusement too. It was brief, but it reminded me that even in moments of rejection, life could still throw in a little irony. We reached the lab, and as the nurses prepared the tests, I couldn't stop thinking about all those mornings I had woken up early to make breakfast for him, all the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home safely from school, all the weekends spent cheering at soccer games. And now, the envelope, the rejection, the pain. I sat down on a bench outside the lab and ran my hands through my hair. I knew this wasn't just about biology. Liam's rejection stung because it came from love. He had lived these 11 years with me, trusted me, and now he was telling me that it didn't matter. I paused and looked directly into the camera in my mind, the way I always imagine when sharing stories online. "If you've ever felt like your efforts weren't appreciated," I said quietly, "stay with me. This one's about what happens when love meets denial, and why showing up matters more than recognition." A deep breath. The nurse called me in. The test was about to start. I knew the next few hours could change everything, but for now, I had to sit with this feeling. The weight of being ignored, the sting of a thankless love, and the hope that somehow he would let me in again. I sat in the cold, sterile waiting room, the envelope still in my jacket pocket. "Dad, I'm not your son." Those words replayed in my head like a broken record. Every sacrifice, every scraped knee, every sleepless night suddenly felt invisible. I had loved him, raised him, shown up for him, and he was rejecting me. The lab door opened, and Dr. Hart stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Parker, we have the preliminary results." My chest tightened. I gripped the edge of the chair like it could anchor me against the storm inside. She motioned me to a private room. As we walked down the hall, Liam followed silently. His steps were light, almost hesitant. and I wondered if he even realized the weight of his words. Inside, 2 nurses were already preparing the samples. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant, but it didn't matter. All I could see was Liam, small and fragile, and the envelope lying between us. "Doctor." Hart began explaining the results, her voice calm, methodical. I barely registered the words until she paused and looked at me. "Ethan, the test shows that you're not a biological match." I froze. Not a match. Not my son. The words slammed into me harder than any punch. I stared at Liam, expecting something: anger, tears, recognition. Instead, he looked down, fidgeting with the hospital blanket. And then it happened. In a quiet, almost accidental way, Liam knocked over the cup of water on the table. It spilled across the edge, soaking some of the test forms. His eyes went wide. "Oh, he mumbled. I couldn't help it. A short, bitter laugh escaped me. Even now, the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Here I was, being denied by the very boy I had loved for 11 years, and he had just made a mess of the results with his own 2 hands. A tiny, ironic moment, and yet it somehow made the pain a little more bearable. Liam flinched at my laugh. I didn't mean..." "I know," I said, softening. "I know." Dr. Hart gave me a gentle look. "Ethan, I understand this is difficult, but there's still hope. We can look for other donors, and we'll do everything possible to save him." I nodded, my throat tight. Hope. That word felt fragile, but it was enough to pull me out of the spiral of rejection. I reached for Liam's hand. He hesitated, then let me hold it. 11 years of fatherhood, of love, didn't disappear just because biology said otherwise. And in that small, quiet gesture, the envelope lost a little of its power. Liam still wasn't acknowledging me in words, but the simple act of letting me touch his hand reminded me. Love isn't measured by DNA or thank yous. Sometimes it's measured by showing up anyway. I leaned back in my chair, looking at him. "You know, buddy, some people call this a revenge story," I said lightly. "But it's not about revenge. It's about staying here, even when it hurts the most." He looked up then, a flicker of something. Recognition? Guilt? Amusement? Passing across his face. It was subtle, but enough to remind me that even in denial, even in rejection, the bond we built over years was still alive. And I realized, finally, that this was my role, my responsibility, my choice. Whether he called me dad or not, I would be here. I would always be here. I walked out of the lab feeling hollow. Liam's rejection still echoed in my head. "Dad, I'm not your son." 11 years of love, and it felt like the universe had decided to erase every memory. But there was no time to crumble. I had to find a way to save him. The hospital computer printed out a list of potential donors, names I had never heard before, people scattered across the country, anyone who could match Liam's fragile immune system. My hands shook as I scrolled. I thought about calling Naida, Liam's mother, but I didn't. Not yet. I had learned that her guidance often came with strings. I needed action, not permission. I rented a small office space nearby, pulled out my laptop and started making calls. One by one, I contacted every person who might be a match, praying quietly. My heart beat faster with each no or not available. Time was slipping away, and with every passing hour, Liam's small body weakened further. And then there was a breakthrough. A donor in Phoenix, Grant Holloway, tall, athletic, a personal trainer. According to the notes, he was a close match. I almost dropped the phone when the private investigator confirmed it. Grant was willing to help, but he had no idea of Liam's condition. I didn't wait. I drove straight to Phoenix, the city blurring past my windshield. 11 years of fatherhood, all built on care and sacrifice, felt meaningless without action. I arrived at Grant's gym, heart pounding. He looked up from a client and frowned. "Ethan? What's—" "Grant," I interrupted, voice tight. "Liam, he's dying. You're the only match. I need you to help him." Grant froze, confusion etched into his face. "Wait, I don't even know him." "I know, but he's my son, the boy I raised. 11 Menda years, Grant. He needs you. Now." Grant's brows knitted together. Then, without warning, one of his dumbbells rolled off the rack, clattering to the floor. Both of us jumped. Grant chuckled nervously. "Guess I'm not used to sudden drama," he muttered. A tiny laugh escaped me, despite the urgency. The world had a way of sneaking humor into tragedy, I realized. He finally nodded, understanding dawning. "All right, let's do this." Within 24 hours, he was tested. The results confirmed he was a partial match, but enough to proceed. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the lingering sting of Liam's words. The rejection. The envelope I couldn't stop seeing in my mind. My love hadn't been denied because of biology. It had been challenged, questioned, and now proven resilient through action. We scheduled the transplant. I stayed by Liam's side, holding his hand, whispering to him even as he drifted in and out of sedation. When the nurses prepared the procedure, Grant entered the room, muscles tensed, nervous, but ready. Liam's eyes flickered open, recognition just enough to see me. I smiled softly. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." And then, for the first time in days, Liam let out a small sigh, his fingers brushing mine. I realized something profound. The envelope, the rejection, the heartbreak. They didn't erase my role as his father. I had shown up when it mattered most. That was the proof, not DNA. As Grant went to donate, I whispered to Liam, "This is it, buddy. You're going to get better. I promise." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The courage in his eyes, the fragile trust he gave me despite everything. It was enough. The hum of the hospital machines was steady, almost hypnotic. I sat in the chair beside Liam's bed, holding his frail hand and staring at the ceiling tiles above. The transplant was over. Grant had donated, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. But nothing could erase the sting of those 11 years, or the words that had haunted me since the envelope. "Dad, I'm not your son." Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at me, confusion and recognition fighting across his face. I squeezed his hand gently. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "You're going to be okay. I'm right here." For a moment, he didn't respond. And then, with the kind of innocent honesty only a child can have, he asked, "Why did you come? You don't even have to. I mean..." His words trailed off, unsure. I swallowed hard. "Because I love you. That's why. DNA doesn't matter. I've been your dad for 11 years, and that's enough." A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in days, the envelope seemed powerless. My love had survived rejection. It had survived denial. It had survived everything. Grant stepped into the room, tall and confident, carrying the faint scent of the gym. He gave me a brief nod and looked at Liam. "Hey, champ. I'm here for you too." Liam's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak. Instead, he yawned and curled back under the blanket. I chuckled quietly. The timing was so perfect it was almost absurd. Here was his biological father standing in the room, and Liam's biggest reaction was a sleepy yawn. Just a little reminder from life that even drama has a sense of humor. The next few days blurred together. Liam's strength returned slowly, his hair started to grow back, and his laughter, soft, fragile, but real, filled the room again. Each small milestone was a reminder that we had made it through the worst. One evening, while I was helping him eat a popsicle, he looked at me with those deep blue eyes. "You're my dad," he said softly. "Even if the test says you're not." My chest tightened. 11 years of love, struggle, and showing up. Finally recognized, even if not by the official DNA. I hugged him tightly, and for the first time in a long while, the tears were not bitter. They were relief. Naida didn't interfere. She had watched from a distance, and I realized she had finally understood something I had known all along. Biology could not erase the bond we built. Grant stayed only long enough to see Liam settled, then returned to Phoenix. Dex, the other biological father, never appeared. But Liam didn't need him. He had me. That was more than enough. Weeks later, in the quiet of my cabin in the mountains,
And boom goes the dynamite. Got you both.
No fair.
He totally cheated.
Liam and I sat by the fire, Micah next to us, laughing over a card game.
And boom goes
The envelope,
dynamite.
the
Got you
rejection,
both.
the heartbreak. All of it felt like a shadow that no longer had power over us. Showing up, being there. That had always been the proof of fatherhood. And now, finally, it was recognized. I looked at my boys and realized something simple but profound. Love isn't measured in DNA or thanks or recognition. It's measured in presence, in care, in the courage to stand when others deny your role. And that's exactly what I had done. The first rays of sunlight cut through the cabin window, painting the wooden walls with gold. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the mountains wake. Liam and Micah were inside, laughing over some silly board game. And for a moment, I let myself just breathe. 11 years of chaos, heartbreak, and rejection had led to this quiet morning. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about the last year had been perfect, but it was real. Liam was recovering from the transplant, his blue eyes sparkling even as he teased Micah over a missed move in the game. And Micah, well, he had grown into his own, still loyal, still full of that stubborn wisdom that had saved me from despair so many times. I thought about Naida, the mother who had pulled every string to rewrite our lives. She had retreated quietly, finally understanding that control couldn't overwrite love. The envelope, the denial, the heartbreak, it had all tested me, but it hadn't broken me. I had shown up when it mattered, and that was proof enough. Grant had returned to Phoenix, and Dex, well, he had chosen his own path, one that didn't involve Liam. That was fine. Liam didn't need them to define who his family was. He had me, and I had them, both of them, for the first time in years, safe and alive. I smiled, thinking of all the small, ridiculous moments that had punctuated this journey. The dumbbell falling in the gym, Liam knocking over the water, the long drives across states chasing hope. They were messy, inconvenient, painful, and somehow perfect. Life had a way of teaching lessons in irony. Liam's laughter floated out the window, and I realized that healing wasn't just medical. It was emotional. It was forgiving. It was choosing to continue caring even when the world, or the people you love, had rejected your efforts. That was fatherhood. That was love. I stood up and walked inside. Liam glanced up at me with that quiet, honest look only a child can give.
See that peak? That's where we'll go next summer.
There's a whole world out there waiting for you.
Dad, can we go fishing this weekend? I laughed. Of course, buddy. You think I'd miss that? Micah rolled his eyes but smiled anyway. You'll probably lose every fish again. Maybe, I said, grinning, but it'll be fun. And I get to do it with my boys. Later that evening, as I tucked Liam into bed, he whispered, "Thanks, Dad, for everything." The words hit differently this time. They weren't just polite. They were recognition, love, and trust. Finally, after all the rejection, the envelope, and the heartache, my effort had been seen. I closed the door gently, took a deep breath, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Life was messy. Family was messy. But it was ours, and I had chosen to stay, even when it hurt the most. That was enough. Before I turned off the lights, I looked at the camera as I often imagine doing while telling this story. If you've ever poured your heart into someone, only to be rejected, remember this: showing up matters. Love matters more than biology, more than recognition, more than anything else. I smiled softly. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like your efforts weren't seen? How did you keep going? Share your story in the comments. Let's remind each other why showing up always counts.